Delighted to welcome back to the stage Neil O'Brien, and now we are also joined by Mr. Cian O'Neill. So Cian, you kind of live this dual life. A day job and a day job and not during the day job. Tell us a bit about both of them.
I mean, my career, if you like, is in CIT now. I was in UL for 17 years and fancy the change. I didn't try your exercise, but I didn't change necessarily the career path, just the institution where I worked. I moved to Cork about 3 years ago. Just had spent all of my adult life actually in Limerick. It just felt like a change, you know, myself and my wife, and we haven't looked back working in CIT. So that's kind of what I do Monday to Friday, if you like, or Saturday and Sundays is part of my job. But I guess my passion, and I like the way you changed the word career earlier on, Neil, you know, you said about my work and what I do. My passion would be sport, would be coaching. And that's something I've been heavily involved in all my life, really, as a player to a certain point. Upon injury, then I went into coaching, and that's kind of where I find myself now.
Tell us about the injury, because that seems to have put you on a very clear path. Tell us about the circumstances of how that changed for you.
Yeah, it's interesting really, because when you're younger and you're playing at a at a relatively high level, you always see yourself playing for 10 years, 15 years, and eventually you'll have to retire because you have been retired by a coach, or maybe just feel yourself you can't give as much as you used to. And that was probably where I was at, and rightly or wrongly, I kind of, like a lot of 17 or 18 year olds, I wanted to travel when I was younger.
Okay.
So kind of leaving county minor squads where most guys are trying to push on to senior, I went and traveled 6 summers in a row. Worked over in Mallorca. Always saying to myself, I'll be 22, I'll be 23 when I come home. Loads of time to play with Kildare, loads of time to play senior football. And I did, and I came home and I got back playing with the club, and I got back in with Kildare, and I'd say it was my first or second session driving back to Limerick from Kildare in training with the great Mick O'Dwyer back in the day, and was in a car accident and didn't really play since.
Yeah.
So all my hopes and my grander scheme plans to live life as a normal 18 to 22 year old and then throw yourself into sport, just like that ended. My first, maybe my second session.
Wow.
Yeah. So luckily, because my job is in sport and in sports science, it was quite easy for me to transition into something else to fill my time. And that's where the coaching gig came from, effectively, you know.
Yeah. And do you find yourself even today thinking, you know, if only, or I wish I could have, or has that shadow disappeared yet, or?
Not really. I did for a while at the time, because all I wanted to do was to play then. You know, I was kind of coming home and growing up, if you like. You know, but I guess my new addiction, you know, was not playing anymore. It was coaching, and I was very lucky. You know, I got into my first job quite soon after rehabbing from my accident, and that was a new lease of life, effectively, for me. You know. I think if I wasn't as fortunate to have the opportunities I have had in the last 10 or 12 years, probably so, you know, because Kildare were the years I missed, if you want to look at it that way, you know, they weren't reaching the heights of some of the teams I've been really, really lucky to have worked with.
Yeah.
So in essence, there was a substitute of sorts. It's not the same as not playing, but there were some good trips along the way with teams I worked with.
But would you have had what I guess a lot of people describe as aptitude? Would you have had an aptitude for coaching that you would have identified as a teenager, perhaps, or were you more interested in aspects of the game than, let's say, the average lad kicking the ball around?
I think so. I knew very young I wanted to be a teacher of sorts.
Okay.
I knew I wanted to work with people. I had a very good role model in my father, Peter. He was heavily involved in community games.
Okay.
Still is, which is a sad reflection of society now. He's 74 years of age and still runs the Newbridge community games, when really it should be 25 and 35 year olds doing that. But if he stepped away, it probably wouldn't happen. So I had that role model growing up. So I was always going to matches or crafts competitions or variety, believe it or not.
Go on.
You know, just with him, and you see people working with people, you see young people developing, maturing. And I just had it in me that I always wanted to be a teacher. And then when I went to UL to study PE, I started to take note of what my lecturers were doing, and all of a sudden I said, well, I still want to be a teacher, but now I want to be a lecturer. You know, I saw that as my career path, if you like, and so it never changed the vocation of working with people and helping people improve. That never changed. But that's how I got into third level. And, you know, when I did get hurt, it was quite easy to transition then into coaching thereafter, you know.
Yeah. As you mentioned, with huge humility, by the way, you've had an extraordinary run of, you use the word opportunities, but you've worked with All-Ireland winning teams, All-Ireland contending teams that, what we use that phrase, elite sport. And certainly within our context, it's elite sport. Did you, how, and here's another cliched word, how kind of organic was that journey, or did you have to kind of, you know, take massive leaps, or did it just kind of fall into place?
A lot of luck along the way.
Okay.
I think it has to be said. I think, you know, a lot of people in life who are successful will always point to different moments, you know, where almost a sliding door opportunity.
I know.
I guess for me, that the PE, the sports science community 15 years ago was quite small.
Okay.
In Ireland, you know, so if a team is looking for someone, a club team now, not even an elite team, you know, they'd look to a PE teacher or to someone who's involved in sport. So my first job was in a tiny rural club in West Clare called Kilmill.
Oh yeah,
a beautiful little parish.
Yeah.
And I used to drive in my '93 Opel Corsa. I was kind of like this, driving down to Kilmill, and that was my first job. And I got it through a chairman of the club who happened to be a PE teacher at St. Nestle's in Limerick. You know, so that was my first ever job, and you know, the reason I travelled an hour there was because it was an opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, and probably not many people knew I was getting into coaching, having been injured. You know, and I did that for a year. And once again, it's one of those things. Mickey Ned O'Sullivan was being brought in as the new Limerick football manager, and Mickey Ned is a PE teacher by trade, and just through the connections, and he would have known of me from playing back in the day, and he contacted me, and that was a very quick, after 1 year, that was you thrown into the inter-county scene. So I was only 25, I think. So I'd say most of the players are older than me.
I was going to ask you that. What's it like working with older players? It's hard enough, as Neil told us the yarn of walking in as a psychologist, an inverted commas scary thing. But what's it like coaching older lads when you're just 25?
It's not easy. I think in 30 seconds they've their mind made up.
Okay.
And in 2 minutes they're not going to change it.
Right.
You know, that's how I would have felt back then. And you had to impress, and you had to improve every single night, because they're not just going to compare you to previous guys. They're going to use the fact that you're so much younger, that you're not from Limerick, you're from Kildare, you know, those type of things against you, which is sad, but it's also a fact of life, you know, and it's sport as well.
Yeah.
And Limerick weren't huge contenders back then. We were coming off the back of some good years. So I had 2 years there, and they're very enjoyable years, but it was a learning curve.
Yeah.
Because, you know, all my playing, you know, had been at representative level, underage, club level to a high level, but now you're in at the county level. So it was really, really learning by doing, and more so learning by making mistakes, you know, and learning from them, you know. And it was 2 good years. Ultimately, we didn't have massive success. But then Liam Sheedy, I call him Sheedy because he's a friend, came in to Tip, and he was looking for someone to run the athletic development of the team, and just once again he would have heard from people, you know, in the scene, and that was the really big break, if you like, because we started on something special there, you know, 3 years together, you know, 3 Munster titles, and then 2 All-Irelands, 1 victory, and that was just fantastic, and things kind of exploded from there, you know. So a lot of luck along the way, but I suppose a lot of lessons in the first 2 years, you know, as I'm sure Neil could tell us all about, how quickly you need to learn in those environments. And I was able to bring those learnings into the Tip scene, and thankfully, you know, we had a good run.
Okay, I think you've already half answered the question I was going to ask you, is to try to attempt to almost reverse engineer, why do you think you have been successful in those coaching roles, as opposed to, let's say, all the other coaches you would have seen in action? What kind of things do you think you've brought to the party for those guys?
I definitely think it helps that you've played.
Okay.
I don't think it, you know, it has to be that way, but I do definitely think it helps. I think a big part of it as well is the skills you learn as a teacher. Okay. You know, I studied 4 years to be a teacher, and you learn things like communication, cooperation, teamwork, organisation, planning, preparation, empathy, which is huge in coaching. So I think that definitely helped to get on the level with the players. But I think the most important thing is I became a student of the game and a student of coaching.
Yes.
So I wanted to be better.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't just happy to be there, because you get found out very, very quickly.
Yeah.
By players. Players are like young children, you know.
Right.
Sometimes they shock you with some of the things they come out with. But players are exactly the same, and especially guys who've been around.
Yeah.
Because you could have been their third or their fourth coach, or fitness coach, depending on which team I was with. Yeah. And I knew that if I wasn't on my game every night going in, that that you'd be found out and you'd be questioned. And ultimately, in elite sport, I'm sure it's the same in business for you guys. One fatal mistake, will very quickly evaporate a lot of the great work you've done to a certain point. Yeah. So I just made sure I was as prepared as I could be. Spent a lot of time. I was in UL, so Munster on our doorstep. Went to watch other teams play. Used to go to Croke Park early so I could watch warm-ups. Some people like to just turn up, or if you're the Dubs, turn up 10 minutes after throwing.
You missed out on a lot of points by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Leave the Dubs alone.
I thought you were from Cork.
It's starting early.
But so yeah, that's what it was. And I worked really hard. Yeah. I worked really, really hard, but the luck it had to be a huge part of it too, being there. And I think when you get recognised then, as in for working with a good team, it does make it easier. It doesn't make it right, because I know a lot of rubbish coaches working with good teams.
Would you
but it does
like to name a few of them?
Yeah, give us.
I said I wouldn't ask you a hard question. Please don't answer that question. I'm in the business of making friends. Yeah. There's a word that sprang to mind for me, Cian, when you were talking there, and you used that example of losing kind of respect, making a mistake or whatever. And that's the concept of trust. Obviously, it's a thing that's hard to earn, especially with a skeptical group. What kind of things have you found that helps build trust in that kind of environment, especially the trust between the player and the coach?
Yeah, I think it almost seems too simplistic, but honesty is a huge thing in coaching. Okay. And it ties back in with Neil's point earlier on, whereby why the hell didn't you tell me this 5 years ago? I remember, my best friend was actually from Cork. He was home from the States a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about his ex-wife, and we were talking about how I told him after, you never should have married her. And he said, but why didn't you tell me at the time?
Oh, man. Yeah.
No, but this is the thing. I actually did tell him at the time.
Okay.
But he actually forgot, or just decidedly didn't listen.
He felt it.
Now I told him on his stag, which was 3 days before the wedding. Okay. But they were in the States, But I did tell him. Okay. But I think you need to be honest. You need to tell players exactly where they're at, because there's a story going around now and it's a true story, and once again without naming names, but the manager would say to player X, okay, we didn't pick him, we're sorry about that, but you're first in, when you do go in, you're going to have to make an impact. And then he'd go to another player at a different time of the session and say, tough call, you were really, really close, but you're first in, so be ready. But you're not knowing that the players are there,
of course,
having their meals after, driving home in the car, and they're on the phone and saying, well, at least I know I'm first in. And he's saying, oh, fuck, you told me I'm first in. And, straight away, trust is gone. And I think that happens in family and work and relationships, So I think if you're honest with players, which is not an easy thing to do, it's not an easy, but the respect will be there, and possibly like that client that you were working with 6 months later, they might think about, well, maybe what he said was right. Yeah. For example, one of the most difficult calls of a manager, and this is my second year managing Kildare. I never had to do it in Kerry, because that was Eamon Fitzmaurice's job. Never had to do it in Mayo, because that was James Horan's job. But you have to tell guys, if listen, your time is up. You're not going to be going forward with us. Okay. It's a horrible thing to do. If you think it's not nice telling a guy he's not going to make the championship team, try tell a guy you're finishing his career, effectively. Yeah. And it's an awful thing to do, and you do get a lot of negative feedback in the moment. But down the line, you'd like to think, a year later, 2 years later, that guy might think, well, maybe it was the right thing. And maybe he saw something, tying back in again with your work, Neil, that he didn't see at the time, but I could clearly see,
They say, or Paddy O'Shea, who said it was years he wouldn't forgive Miko for leaving him off.
Yeah,
and he was 35 or 6.
Absolutely, yeah.
Has anyone ever kind of squared up to it? Yep. So-and-so, O'Neill, are you putting me on, blah, 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 or did they keep it verbal?
No, not yet, not yet. But it's only year 2.
Yeah, we're only starting out. Yeah. You made a point there that triggered something in my mind about one of the things I've learned along the way is this, especially when I would have started out in the business of trying to help people, whether it was within organisations or in coaching or anything, was this idea, you need to have a process, not so much a process, but if you have a method here now, this is a great method and this method will solve all the world's problems. But you soon realise that, the one-size-fits-all delusion is a toxic belief, really. So, how do you practically apply that in a team environment where you have like 32 or 3 guys talking out, knowing that, that's true, but how do you kind of, resolve the tension between having to keep a team message and yet 32 individuals?
And it is one of the most difficult jobs in coaching or management. I think a lot of it comes down to how well do you know your players, and knowing what makes them tick as opposed to thick.
Yeah.
You have a dressing room with 35 different guys, coming from totally different backgrounds, different demographics. Some guys just in the door, think their career is ahead of them. Some guys on the way out, and a lot of different things going on. Some of them in college and have the pressures of study. Some of them in breakups. Some of them have just had a young baby. And I think the 30 seconds to 2 minutes that you could spend with a player in the dressing room before a session, walking off the pitch after, can be as invaluable as the 3 or 4 sessions of technical or tactical work for them, because it shows you care. Asking them how's the baby, or how's your wife, or how's school. With the strikes, we have a lot of teachers. I think when you have that connection with a player, they're walking away saying this isn't just about football or hurling, and this isn't just about winning. He or she actually just wants to know how I'm doing. And I think that's a real lesson that I would have learned over the years, because the more experience you get, you'd like to think you learn from the managers and the coaches and the performance coaches, sports psychologists that you work with. And I definitely think it's a skill set as a manager that you really need, because your job it's really overarching everyone else's.
Yeah.
The fitness coach is a very specific job. The coach is a very specific job. As a manager, you need to manage the players, but you also need to manage the coaches. And you need to manage the environment to make sure it's a healthy and it's a safe environment for them, but it's also a challenging environment and a tough environment. And I think when you get to know them on that level, they do appreciate it.
Okay. How do you miss being, let's say, in the Kerry role where you were a coach working for Eamon Fitzmaurice? Like, do you miss the ability to, have a word with a fella coming off the pitch and saying, listen, Fitzmaurice was telling me there about this, and, that kind of thing of I'm on your side, and, but no, you're the guy. Yeah. And do you miss that element, or how do you incorporate that even?
Yeah, I do. It's a really good question. It's a second really good question.
Yeah, I'm not too. 1 per hour isn't too bad.
It's a really good question.
He's having a good night.
There's 3 hierarchies. A lot of people wouldn't understand this, and I'm sure some people in management don't even understand this, because it took me a long time to understand it. You have the back room, who aren't selectors as such. So you have your medical team, who traditionally are very close with the players, because they're the guys that are trying to get them right. And there's what we call table talk. When they're on the physio bench, they're spending a lot of one-to-one time, and that's where the chat and the banter. Physios sometimes can be the best psychologists in the whole back room, because of the personal time they have. There's really strong relationships with players there, because ultimately your role is to serve the players and service the players. In terms of car mechanics terms, make them better, fix them, and you're not deciding whether they play or not. So they tend to have the closest relationship.
Okay.
Then you have the management team, excluding the manager. They have a little bit more freedom, if you like, but if they're selectors, they still have a core responsibility that I'm going to have to decide whether you play or whether you don't play, whether you're staying on the field, whether you're coming off. So there's a little bit more distance, and there has to be, and I think that makes sense. I think everyone would understand that, players included. And then ultimately there's the manager, who's the head of the management team, who has the final say in the final call. Okay. So there's almost that extra little bit of distance there. And it's not, it's not that you ensure that it happens. It's just really the nature of the role and your responsibility. And there's no doubt, the relationship I would have had with Tip, not because I was there 4 years, but that's obviously part of it. But some of them were still incredibly tight. We're going to weddings every year because I wasn't a selector. but was still responsible for a large part of what they did. Whereas that would have changed in Mayo and Kerry, and obviously changes a lot now in Kildare. Yeah.
It strikes me that there's a parallel here between the corporate environment where you have people who, let's say, have responsibility for a division or a function or whatever, but that they also have, for the want of a forced metaphor, coaching muscle, right? So they're good, they are people who bring out the best in others. But then they have, let's say, layers of people beneath them, and you have this kind of weird thing going on where the top person, if they're kind of helping someone who's somewhere in the hierarchy, someone in between's going, hey, why is he talking to them? And, that's weird. Are they undermining me and all that kind of stuff? Does that come up, let's say, in a football team context?
It has done. Yeah. It has done in very few, but in some setups, it would have done. Yeah. And it wasn't a nice experience to work in when that was going on. It's not something I would want to talk about, but I certainly have experienced it where there was a little bit of tension because of that, But I think as a manager, you need to be a very strong facilitator. Yeah. And you need to be a very good people person. Yeah. And there needs to be, back to your initial question, there needs to be a huge amount of trust. Yeah. If you look at even Paul O'Connell's book, Paulie's book at the moment, when he talked about O'Sullivan versus Kidney, but one of Kidney's great strengths was that he trusted everybody around him because he knew he wasn't the best backs coach. He knew he wasn't the best forwards coach. So he trusted the people, and it almost looked like he was giving them the reins. Yeah. But at all stages, he knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah. And the coaches knew exactly what he wanted from them. And ultimately, they had huge success. Yeah. Whereas Eddie was a different type of manager. He was very much hands-on, and he wanted control over everything. Yeah. And had relative success. And I'm not saying it was the two different styles that led to it, but you do certainly have those two environments. I think one of the big mistakes a lot of managers make, just from being involved in the games over the years, is that they don't choose people to work with them that are going to challenge them. They almost choose people to work with them because they know them, because they know they won't rock the boat, because if it comes to a 2-2, it's going to be easy to make that ultimate call. Okay. Ultimately, it's the players that lose out there. That's what I find. So you need to bring in people who have a level of challenge and will be tough and they'll be key decision makers, but they'll also respect their role and they respect your role ultimately as a manager. Yes. And that's a difficult thing for some people because they don't want to let go of what they ultimately believe is the key control and the key thing of a manager. And I think that's a big mistake.
Okay. It's valuable advice for us. Thanks. Cian, I mentioned to you beforehand that I've been talking to basically as many people that I knew who would have worked with you in the past. This is a little bit like Neil's panel, except I wasn't asking him what Cian's dream job was. I think he might have it. But I'm just going to read out a few things that they told me about you, right? This is how they described you. And I want you to listen to them, and then I want you to tell me which one of these gives you the most sense of pride, okay?
I thought you were going to say who said which one.
Yeah. I was going to say. That was part of the contract I had with them.
I was going to say, I bet you that bollocks of Shay's in there somewhere.
No. Confident, organised, ambitious, likes challenging players, sets high standards and expects others to meet them. Resilient. No, that's 6 things. Which one of those imbues you with the greatest sense of pride?
Will you go again? Please.
Not a bother. This is good. By the way, I hope Cian is feeling as good as I was when I got the feedback from my panel. Confident, organised, ambitious, likes, and by the way, ambitious in this context was entirely positive. I know we've had that funny chat about the Irish culture. Fucking look at your man, ambitious. Likes, now this is an interesting one, likes challenging players, again, good in this context, sets high standards and expects others to meet them, and resilient.
I think it's between 4 and 5.
Okay.
Likes challenging players and sets high standards, which I think are very closely linked.
And why do you think you select those? What's driving that choice?
I just think at the elite level, the further you go in a competition, there's very, very little between the top teams. I think you would have seen that clearly in the Football All-Ireland this year and in many semi-finals and finals the last number of years. And I think if you're not consistently challenging your players to be better, and encouraging them, by the way, to challenge each other, because if it's always coming from the manager or the coach, it's almost like you're drawing it out of them. Whereas when you create a culture whereby they challenge each other and they're more accountable to each other for that singular and ultimate goal, as opposed to just because the manager wants it. I think that's a really strong place to be, and I think that's a really positive culture to embed in your team. So I think by setting those challenges, you're encouraging them to be better, and just reminding them effectively that, you know, it's that tight, and it is that tight at the top in terms of success and failure. You know, and failure is a cruel word, but in sport, ultimately there only is one winner. And those guys aren't there to get to semi-finals. They're not there to get to finals. I know it's a cliched thing in Kerry, but, you know, one All-Ireland is not even thought of down there. You know, it's how many jingles you have in your pocket. And Dublin will have the same culture now. You know, they're after winning so many in the last couple of years. So unless you're consistently challenging them and taking them out of that comfort zone, which I think is one of Jim Gavin's biggest strengths. You know, the fact that they've done back-to-back when people said Dublin never would, because they'll be so cocky and, you know, all about themselves with their cars and their coppers and all that stuff. You know, which was true of their culture for many years. And living up there, Neil, you probably would have known that and seen it, I'd say. I think that's been one of Jim's biggest strengths. You and coppers, were they?
Do you want to comment on that?
No, I just let that one slide.
Okay.
So I think that one because of that, and the standards for me goes with it.
Okay.
You know.
Good man, Cian. Neil, I actually am going to bring you in on this question, and feel free to tear us apart from here on in. In the last few years, there's been this kind of bounce back within, let's say, classic GAA circles about the emergence of so-called modern coaching. The likes of Spillane and Brawley and these guys have famously used words like spoofers and bullshitters, fellas with earpieces. You know, you were walking under the earpieces with Fitzmaurice. So, so how do you handle that kind of, as I call it, it's like a recoil, this kind of, you know, negative reaction? Or do you even see yourself as part of that modern coaching thing that these guys are giving out about? Or what's your reaction to that when you hear it?
2 words, Spillane and Brawley.
Okay.
Really, you know, that would be my reaction to it. Pat Lam made a really good commentary after Connacht lost their third match in a row of the Pro 12, having won it last year, and all their detractors were saying, there was a one-saw flash in the pan, and they were getting a bit of flack. And his response was, why would I react to people making comments who have never stood on a sideline? They've never stood in a dressing room, have never worked with these men, you know, and the lashings of rain and the hailstones and so on and so forth. He said it's just noise. And that's what I would say. The lads might have played a bit, you know, might have been very good, and both of them were, Pat in particular. But I don't think you should have any right to comment on management coaching unless you've actually been in that position yourself, unless you've been in a training session, unless you've seen what goes on there. It's sound bites, and it's good for them because it keeps them in the job. Ratings are good, and, you know, more luck to them. I think the people that really matter don't care. You know, I think it's everyone else who thinks it's too false and it's appalling and so on and so forth. You know, but I don't think it bothers us too much. There are spoofers out there, but in every walk of life. We had a chat just before we came on here about a very good article an old colleague of mine, Tyg McIntyre, wrote, and it was actually about sports psychology, you know, which is his background and Neil's as well, and it was called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly of sports psychology in terms of working with teams. And he said,
was Neil mentioned?
Of the good. He never mentioned names. He was very cute about that. But effectively what he was saying was that, and this could relate to teachers, it could relate to, God forgive me, priests, it could relate to any number of vocations or careers. But the good were the guys who are out there, they know what they're doing, they know how to get results, they know how to work with players and athletes, and they're doing a good job. They were the good, and that's quite straightforward. And the bad ones were the ones that just, they didn't know how to get the best. They weren't getting results. They weren't doing anything necessarily wrong, but they just weren't particularly good at what they did. And they're kind of ones you want to steer away from. But he said the ugly ones were the really dangerous ones, because they're the ones that don't know what they don't know. Okay. And they're spoofing, they're making up things as they go along, and they can actually make players worse, and they can make setups worse, you know. So I'm not saying that everyone out there working with teams or even working with elite teams are brilliant at what to do, but I just think to generalise and to say, oh, you're man with the headpiece, or you know, it's rubbish, really. It's rubbish.
Neil, do you still get a certain amount of resistance or cynicism just because of who you are rather than what you're saying?
In sports psychology.
I thought you were going to say from me. Yeah.
No, I think that sports psychology now is overrated. I think it's time for its role in sport to change. And so, for example, if you look at mental illness and mental health, most of the strategies for having good mental health are physical,
right?
Not mental.
Yeah.
So therefore, if a team is struggling or a person is struggling, chances are most of the time is they've too much mental. They're thinking too much. So why would we put more mental in to fix the mental? You know, give them something to do. Yeah. So I think sports psychology is massively overrated. I think if I was the manager of a team, I would bring in somebody with Cian's expertise, which is the physical end of things. I think that's better for people's minds than more psychology. I mean, ultimately, the psychologist's job is to get people back to not thinking.
Right.
That's their job.
Isn't it true?
It's go and play. Because when we talk to anybody after they've played a great game, they're thinking of nothing.
Yeah.
So they've no need for psychology.
Yeah.
So why would we give them psychology? So in other words, we're trying to get them back to not thinking. So it shouldn't be a psychologist that does that. It should be somebody else that does that. So I would rather that somebody like Cian or somebody would give them 3 jobs to do. An actual fact, 3 jobs to do, and just don't mind. Like, even if you're thinking so-called negatively, just if you do those 3 things, you know, that'll probably take care of it anyway. So the more sports people I meet and the more work I do in the area, the more cynical and disillusioned I'm becoming with it. I also think people hide in it. Oh, my head wasn't right, you know. So people, I think, hide behind psychology when sometimes they're just not working hard enough. They're just not minding their diet, you know, whatever. So I think people hide in it too. It's a good place to hide. So I think we need less sports psychology now and give people stuff to do. It should be physical, not mental.
Very interesting. There are young people in the audience tonight. Obviously, you know, we talked at the start, Neil, about kids coming up with so many choices and uncertainty as a given. But actually, this is a question that applies to both of you. And it's not so much what advice would you give young people, but it's actually 2 things. What kind of things would you encourage people to explore, and things that you'd encourage them to avoid?
In terms of exploration, I would encourage them to explore what they enjoy. If you look at all the research in physical activity and exercise participation, the biggest reason for fall-off is adherence. And the reason people don't adhere to it is because they don't enjoy it. They're doing it because they read it in a magazine or because their friends are doing it or whatever the case may be. For me, the key thing is select things that you enjoy, independent of ultimately what you think the results are going to be, you know, and just be happy, whatever that activity is, and see where it takes you. But come January, we all know what's going to happen. You know, gym memberships are going to go through the roof. Tag rugby teams are going to be set up with people who don't know that a rugby ball is actually not spherical. You know, all these different things are going to happen. But by February, March, they're going to be gone. So for me, it has to tie in with ultimately what they enjoy.
Brilliant.
And I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's what you love to do, you know. I think that's really important. I don't like the second question you asked. What should they avoid? I don't want them to live in a bubble either. You know, I think it's important to experience, you know, many things. So I wouldn't. I don't. When you say what should they avoid, I honestly can't think of anything. I'd rather that they have a go. But I think, yeah, we should be making things, school, education, work more fun and enjoyable for them, really. Yeah. I think that fixes a lot of things too.
Yeah. Where do your greatest learnings come from, Cian? When you think of where you learn the most, where does that happen?
I think my own and other people's mistakes.
Okay.
Sam Levinson, the great American satirist, you know, had a really good statement. Learn from the mistakes of others. You'll never live long enough to make them all yourself.
True.
And I think it's well put.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I always encourage people, you know, to go to, if you're an aspiring coach or trainer or whatever the case may be, to go to sessions, to go to matches, and you know, and to learn from them. Don't just go to watch, because that's what a spectator does. But you don't want to be a spectator. You want to be a coach, or you want to be a trainer. You know, so I think by doing that, you know, and engaging with the activity, you know, you begin to see what's working, what's not. You become an analyst of other people, and ultimately, sometimes what can be the most difficult thing is to analyze yourself, because you're looking introspectively, and that can be quite an uncomfortable thing, which is why that task is brilliant, because you're asking other people to do it for you, you know. So I think that's what I would be recommending them to do, is to try things, make mistakes, learn from them, look what's happening in other spheres. Look what's working, look what's not. I love reading post-match interviews. Right. You know, just to see what coaches and managers say after the fact, especially matches that I watched myself. Yeah. Because then you're looking at the correlation between what you felt and what they felt. And I think that's a really good, I know it's quite scientific in some senses, but I think it's a great educational tool and a great exercise.
Super. Now, guys, I'm conscious of time. We're going to open up the discussion for questions. But for the purposes of those watching us all over the world, wherever they may be, a big boola boss for Cian O'Neill and Neil O'Brien.